Hey class, we are back for another chapter, and I realized that last time I recorded I said we were on chapter 2, but we were actually on chapter 3. So I've already read chapter 3, which was Lunch in the Library. So we are on to chapter 4 now. So chapter 4 is called The Principal's Office. So we all know who's in the principal's office. Here we go. Connor had only been sitting outside the principal's office for 10 minutes, but it felt like 2 hours. The mystery of why he was there was picking at his psyche like a pair of hungry buzzards. He had been a surprisingly good student this year. Not as great as his sister, perhaps, but good nevertheless. Connor's grades were decent, although he probably could have done better in science and math, as he imagined most students could. Besides occasionally forgetting which revolution happened where, he was doing fairly well in his history class, too. And for the first time in his life, he was actually enjoying assignments in his English class. He was confident he hadn't done anything wrong. So why was he there? He grew paranoid. Someone had possibly framed him. Was he being held responsible for the graffiti on the lockers or the goldfish put in the faculty toilets? Sure, Connor thought those pranks were hilarious, but he hadn't done them. If they didn't think he was guilty, did they think he knew who it was and wanted him to testify? Could he plead the fifth in school? Did he have the right to a lawyer or a phone call? The door to the principal's office opened and a girl ran out in tears. Connor instantly tensed. "Mr. Bailey?" Mrs. Peters called from inside her office. Connor gulped. Hearing her call out his name was just as terrifying today as it had been when she taught him in the 6th grade. A huge promotion was the last thing she had expected, but Mrs. Peters had recently come up in the world. After 25 long years of teaching, Mrs. Peters had made the tough decision to retire. The subject had been on the veteran educator's mind for quite some time. Unbeknownst to her students, Mrs. Peters kept a calendar at her desk for years and marked down the days until she was eligible. She often daydreamed about her life after teaching. She planned all the exotic vacations she wanted to take. She made a list of all the small fixes around her condo she'd finally have time to make. She assembled everything she needed to start a vegetable garden in her small yard. In other words, she was more than ready. But in the final weeks leading up to the conclusion of her teaching career, Mrs. Peters received the offer to become a principal. As appealing as a life of gardening and relaxation was, a life as principal gave her the essence of what she loved the most about being a teacher: authority over impressionable youngsters. Needless to say, she didn't hesitate to take the job. She thrived in the powerful position of administering punishment, and occasionally something would come up that allowed her to do what she loved more than anything, which was why she called Connor Bailey into her office. "Have a seat," Mrs. Peters ordered. Connor sat across from her so obediently he reminded himself of Buster, but didn't expect to be rewarded with a biscuit. His eyes wandered around the room. He noticed Mrs. Peters decorated her office in the same pattern and floral print as the dresses she wore. "Do you know why I have called you in here today?" Mrs. Peters asked. She wasn't even looking at him. Her eyes were busy scanning through a stack of papers in her hand. "Not a clue," Connor said. He could almost see what the papers were in the reflection of her glasses. "I wanted to talk to you about the writing you've been doing in your English class," she said, finally making eye contact. Connor realized the papers she was going through were in his handwriting. He panicked. "Is this about my essay on To Kill a Mockingbird?" he asked. "I know I wrote, one of the saddest parts about this book is that a girl is named Scout, but I talked to Miss York about my approach and understand why it could have been better." Mrs. Peters' eyes squinted and her brow flexed in a judgmental manner. This was bound to happen at least once when she was in the same room as Connor. "Or maybe this is about my report on Animal Farm," Connor said. "I know I said I wish George Orwell had used something to represent politics that didn't give me a major craving for a bacon cheeseburger, but that's really how I felt. I wasn't trying to be funny." "No, Mr. Bailey," Mrs. Peters said. "I called you to my office to talk about the creative writing you've been working on in Mrs. York's class." "Oh," Connor asked. Creative writing was actually his favorite part of the class. "How am I screwing that up?" "You're not," Miss Peters said. "It's fantastic." Connor's head jerked in disbelief. Did you just say what I think you just said? Connor asked. I believe so, Miss Peters said, almost as surprised as he was. Miss York was afraid your stories might have been plagiarized, so she sent them to me to look over. But they're unlike anything I've ever read. I assured her they appeared very original to me. Connor was having difficulty processing it all. Mrs. Peters, of all people, was complimenting and defending him. So I'm here for a good thing? Connor asked. A very good thing, Mrs. Peters said. Your stories and perspectives on fairy tale characters are wonderful. I loved your stories about the Charming dynasty searching for the long-lost Charming brother and the evil queen's long-lost love being trapped in her magic mirror. And Trix, the misbehaving fairy, and Troll Bella, the homely troll princess, are such imaginative new characters. It's very impressive. Thank you, Connor said. Can I ask you what inspired these stories? Mrs. Peters said. Connor gulped. He didn't know how to answer. Technically, he had used the class to write about his experiences, so the stories weren't necessarily creative writing. Was it considered lying, even if he couldn't tell the truth? They just came to me, Connor said with a shrug. I can't really explain it. Mrs. Peters did something Connor had never seen her do before. She smiled at him. I was hoping you would say that, Mrs. Peters said. She retrieved a folder from the inside of her desk. I took the liberty of looking at the student profile you filled out at the beginning of the school year. I found it very interesting that under future career aspirations, you simply wrote something cool. Connor nodded. I stand by that, he said. Well, unless you have the goal of becoming a professional snowman, is it safe to presume that you're open to suggestions? Mrs. Peters asked. Sure, Connor said. He still hadn't thought of any jobs that fit the description. Mr. Bailey, have you ever considered becoming a writer? Mrs. Peters said. If these stories are any indication, with time and practice, I think you may have what it takes. Although they were the only people in the room, Connor had to remind himself she was talking to him. A writer? Connor asked. Me? The thought had never crossed his mind. His head instantly filled with doubts regarding the prospect, like white blood cells attacking a virus. Yes, you, Miss Peters said, and pointed at him for further distinction. But aren't writers supposed to be super smart? Connor asked. Don't they say things like, I concur, and I don't identify with the likes of this? Those kinds of people are writers, not me. They'd laugh at me if I tried to be one of them. Mrs. Peters exhaled a small gust of air through her nose, which Connor remembered was her version of a laugh. Intelligence is not a competition, she said. There is plenty to go around, and there are many ways it can be demonstrated. But anyone can write, right? Connor asked. I mean, that's why authors get judged so harshly, isn't it? Because technically everyone could do it if they wanted to. Just because anyone can do something doesn't mean everyone should, Mrs. Peters said. Besides, anyone with an internet connection feels they have the credentials to critique or belittle anything these days. I suppose, Connor said. But his defeated look said otherwise. What makes you think I'll be a good writer? My stories are so simple compared to other ones out there, and I don't have a very good vocabulary, and I'm worthless without spell check. Mrs. Peters took off her glasses and massaged her eyes. Connor was still a challenging student to get through to. Having something worth telling and a passion to tell it are what make you a good writer, Mrs. Peters said. I can't tell you how many times I've read novels or articles that use complicated words and witty wordplay to cover up the fact that they have absolutely no story to tell. A good story should be enjoyed. Sometimes simplicity can go a long way. Connor still wasn't sold on the idea. I don't know if it's for me. You don't have to decide right now, Mrs. Peters said. I'm only asking you to think about it. I would hate it if somebody with your imagination graduated and didn't do something cool with it. She locked eyes with him, and another rare small smile appeared on her face. I have two loves in my career, reprimanding and encouraging, Mrs. Peters went on. Thank you for letting me encourage today. I don't get many opportunities. No problem, Connor said. It's nice to be in the other category for a change. Mrs. Peters put her glasses back on and handed Connor his stack of papers. He figured their meeting was over now and headed to the door, relieved not to be in tears like his principal's prior guest. I am so proud of you, Connor, Mrs. Peters said just as he reached for the door handle. You've come a long way from napping in my class. All Connor could do was smirk sweetly at her. If you had told him a year and a half ago that one day Mrs. Peters would become one of his greatest supporters, or refer to him by his first name, he would have never believed it. Connor mulled things over as he walked home. His thoughts soared into the realm of possibility and sank into the realm of uncertainty. Had Mrs. Peters gone mad, or was he, Connor Bailey, actually capable of becoming a writer one day? Could he actually make a career out of writing about the experiences he and his sister had had in the fairy tale world? Would anyone want to read his stories about Troll Bella and Trix, or the Evil Queen and the Big Bad Wolf Pack, or Jack and Goldilocks? Would those people mind if he wrote about them? If he ever saw her again, would Goldilocks beat the living daylights out of him for writing about the love triangle between her, Jack, and Red Riding Hood? Connor figured people had been writing the same stories about them for centuries. Surely they wouldn't mind if he gave the world a little update here and there. But what about Alex? She had as much ownership over their experiences as he did. Would it bother her if he started sharing them with the world? Alex had always been the one with a future, not him. Planning had always been her specialty. Connor always expected she would grow up to be a doctor or a lawyer or president. Unfortunately, he hadn't given his own future very much thought, so any prospect seemed like a stretch. Connor realized he wanted to get Alex's input on all of this, but as he reached their house, he came to a halt. There was something there he didn't expect to see. What's Bob doing here? Connor asked himself, recognizing the car parked outside their home. The front door flew open before Connor could open it himself. Alex was standing on the other side, wide-eyed and white-faced. Finally, she said in relief. What's going on? Connor asked. Why's Bob here? He wanted to talk to us before Mom got home, Alex said. He knows that we know and said he wanted to ask us something. I'm pretty sure I know what it is. What? Connor asked, completely oblivious. Just get inside, Alex told him. I think there's about to be a major development. That's the end of the chapter.